You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
He said it! He said it!
So I saw The Flash for the first time around a week ago, and I walked out of the theater and I thought it was fine, I guess, but completely overhyped to the point of parody by some people. And it really blew me away that some people genuinely hyped this film up like it was some kind of masterpiece. Like, where was that? So I went back to the movie theater a day later to see if I had missed something, to see if I was the one that was delusional, or to see if the people hyping this film are actually completely nuts. And now I hate myself because I've paid to see this cheap nostalgia bait twice. The Flash is one of those increasingly common nostalgia bait films that throws logic and reason out the window in order to get butts in seats to prey off the nostalgia of longtime fans. Bringing back legacy actors, dropping iconic lines of dialogue, and pretending like it all makes sense, but in reality is just incredibly contrived and cheap storytelling to make a quick buck for studios, which despite my dumbass watching this film twice, doesn't seem to be working anyway. The Flash is the epitome of pretty much everything that is wrong with modern Hollywood, save for a couple small tidbits, which I'll also touch on. So I'm pretty much just going to tear this film apart, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there were some cool ideas here, but I'm just going to dive into why The Flash is basically everything wrong with modern Hollywood. But before we do, a quick word from today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Now look, you've probably heard of Raid Shadow Legends featuring amazing graphics, over 650 unique champions, billions of ways to customize and build champions, boss fights, PvP updates. This game has got a whole lot going on, and you probably know about it all. But Raid have asked me to list off my top 3 favorite things about the game. Number 1, tons of champions to collect. As mentioned, there are over 650 of them from different factions, so there's just something for everyone. Number 2, strategy depth. There are so many ways to approach how you play this game, so it helps keep things fresh. And number 3, there is endless content with new champions and updates every single month. Speaking of which, to celebrate Raid Call of the Arbiter, they've added new characters from the series into the game as playable characters. Artak is the first of those, and he is absolutely free to use. All you have to do is log into Raid for 7 days between now and July 24th. So if you haven't checked out Raid yet, then new players can use my link or scan the QR code on screen to get a free starter pack with all of these in-game goodies. And when you're in-game, come find me at Movie Overload and join my clan. So head to the link in the description below and I'll see you in-game, and a big thank you to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. So, nostalgia is one thing plaguing Hollywood. Why have an original thought with new and interesting characters when you can bring back old ones in an attempt to elevate your lacking material? In the past few years alone, we have been bombarded with nostalgia bait films and shows that are simply unrelenting and almost have no shame in how reliant they are on cameos from legacy characters. It's no surprise that the superhero genre jumped on this very thing when the idea of multiverses came into play. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that all of these nostalgia bait films are bad, because they're not. That's just not true. Spider-Verse just came out and was fantastic, but by no means relied on nostalgia. And even Spider-Man No Way Home, which also was nostalgia bait in every sense of the word, but still had some quality there. Now, I know that No Way Home soured on some people over time, but seeing Andrew and Toby come back felt like more than just a cheap move to get butts in seats. When Toby and Andrew came back, it wasn't just so we could do the Leo point and let the dopamine rush hit us like a ton of bricks. No, it provided some finality and redemption to pre-existing characters that had franchises cut short. And their presence alone reflected the struggles of our protagonist and provided key aspects of his character development. The nostalgia in that film, for the most part, actually had a purpose. But almost everything else in Hollywood is the purest example of cheap, uninspired, lazy attempts to make up for shitty writing and revolving doors of filmmakers coming onto and leaving projects. Now, I'm not saying there is no place for nostalgia bait. The very idea of that alone brought us the revival of the Rocky franchise with Creed, which was a powerful, tastefully done, and genuinely worth your time film. Hell, even Martin Scorsese isn't above nostalgia bait with The Irishman, trying to recapture the magic of the careers of De Niro, Pesci, and Al Pacino. Rare instances like this do actually work. So I'm by no means shitting on the very concept of nostalgia, but there's a line, and it gets crossed 9 times out of 10. The Flash is essentially the epitome of the worst of nostalgia bait, a film that has absolutely zero integrity when it comes to balancing nostalgia and actual plot and character development. The CGI cameos in this film are absolutely laughable. The CGI in general in this film is absolutely awful, but the cameos just took it to a whole new level. Like, why actually work out a way to include many of the cameos from these returning characters that actually have impact on the story and impact on the protagonist, when you can just shamelessly showcase them all in an awful CGI compilation with not Nicolas Cage? And on top of that, feel the need to resurrect deceased actors just for a quick finger point that has little to no bearing on the actual story. Nostalgia is a powerful tool in a filmmaker's arsenal with a film like this, but I just found it weird that Andy Muschietti mishandled it to such an extreme extent. Like, amongst all the cameos in this film, there was no Grant Gustin, there was no Henry Cavill. If you're gonna go with these cameos, maybe drop the ones people actually want to see. Anyway, let's take a look back at the marketing of this film. Not that there was that much of it, because they didn't really market it properly because Ezra Miller was too busy, you know, being Ezra Miller. But there are two lines in the trailers by Michael Keaton's Batman that are iconic.
You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. I'm Batman.
Now, you'd think those were just for the trailers because they couldn't really actually have a place in the film and it feel natural, right? Wrong. Both lines feature in the film and it just feels like Michael Keaton huffing his way through a line to get people to cheer. Now, I'm fine with this, but when it has no real reasoning, it just comes off as forced. The scenes in which Michael Keaton delivers a lot of these iconic lines, yes, it's entertaining because it's Michael Keaton as Batman and who doesn't love that? But it's so obvious that it has almost zero place in the conversation at hand. It's there purely for fan service and nothing else. When nostalgia works the best, it's when it mixes the nostalgic element, the fan service, with actual plot, with actual character, with actual meaning for the story. Now look, despite that, Michael Keaton's return as Batman was definitely the reason a lot of us went to see this movie, and for some, for that reason alone, it might have been worth it for you. Because let's be honest, none of us saw this movie to see if our favorite actor, Ezra Miller, was going to excel as Barry Allen. And if you did, then... well, that sucks. And the cherry on top of the nostalgia bait just not working in The Flash, let's go to the final scene of the film. George Clooney shows up as Bruce Wayne. Now, this in itself is kind of funny and leaves the film on an incredibly funny note, even though it was kind of cringe, let's be real. But the problem with that is it comes at the sacrifice of complete tonal whiplash. The ending of this film results in Barry having to realize that he can't save his mother and having to accept that, say goodbye, and not interfere. A pretty poignant ending that I honestly commend. It's nice to see a superhero movie go for an ending that isn't good guy versus bad guy and the good guy wins and everything is great. No, it went for something different and I applaud the film for that. This was good. But then the tonal whiplash absolutely slaps you across the face with the George Clooney cameo in the final seconds of the film, and it's like, man, you can't have your cake and eat it too. This is what I mean when I say this film doesn't know how to handle its nostalgia. It wants to tell this emotional story with Barry and his parents, but wants to undercut any emotion brought forth from that story with contrived cameos that absolutely destroy the film's tone and pulls you right out of it. The Flash is basically just a textbook example of the misuse of nostalgia in a big blockbuster. Even Ben Affleck's cameo is essentially him just telling Barry that it's a bad idea, but then he just does it anyway, so it's like, okay, so what was the point of Batman being here? Oh, and Wonder Woman's cameo. Why was that important? I couldn't tell you. Aquaman's cameo? Again, I couldn't tell you. The Flash just fumbled for the most part the very thing that had most people interested to go and see it. We know what makes a good multiverse film. We've seen it a couple times now. This film just does the complete opposite. A textbook lesson in how nostalgia bait doesn't always work. One of the worst things about modern Hollywood is that movies these days feel more like content than anything else. With the rise of streaming platforms, this sort of change was pretty much inevitable. Despite this film being released in movie theaters, it still just feels like content as opposed to a cinematic experience. It feels like the actors have just shown up to cash the check. Take Michael Shannon for example. When Man of Steel came out, this dude was in 100%. He trained physically for 6 months. He dived deep into the motives of Zod, and there was something for him there to sink his teeth into. And as a result, he took the role very seriously. Now, I'm not saying Man of Steel is the peak of cinema or anything, but it's clear what actors are actually taking seriously these days, and it's not films like this. If you've seen any of the promo for this film and any Michael Shannon interview, let's just say the guy isn't exactly hiding how he really feels about films like this.
As I recall, at the end of Man of Steel, Superman breaks my neck and kills me. So then I get this call. I'm like, they saw Man of Steel, right? My manager's like, yeah, they saw Man of Steel, but it's different. I'm like, what is it? It's a multiverse. I'm like, I don't know what that means.
He often refers to these multiverse movies feeling like filmmakers playing with action figures as opposed to them being actual films. And it's hard to disagree with him because majority of multiverse films over the past few years have been exactly that. Again, not all of them, but most. The worst of them filled with contrived cameos just because you can with this multiverse idea. The multiverse is essentially a hall pass for Hollywood to prey off nostalgia, and they're milking it at every possible turn. It's less about creating a meaningful, fresh story and more so about pumping out content that preys on the cheapest impulses of a film goer. Just because you can fill your films with nostalgia bait because of the film's context doesn't always mean you should. Just because the filmmakers could, they didn't stop to think if they should. If anything in my 26 years on this planet has taught me, it's that Ian Malcolm is always right. And just touching on that Zod point from earlier, Zod in this film makes absolutely zero sense. Why anybody thought Zod was the villain this film needed is absolutely beyond me. He has 10 minutes of screen time. He's there just so we can do the typical big CGI mess battle at the end that's become synonymous with lackluster superhero films. Like, find me a solid reason why the antagonist in a Flash movie needs to be Zod. Please, my ears are open. Zod has no proper connection with Barry Allen worthy to make him the antagonist of a Barry Allen Flash film. Zod doesn't even know who Barry is. It's no wonder that Michael Shannon just collected the paycheck here. My man collected the bag on something he knew was stupid and dipped. Respect. I also find it funny that despite this being one of the most expensive films ever made, the VFX are absolutely laughably bad. It puzzles me that technology gets better and better, and this film sat on the shelf for how long, and then a film releases with CGI this poor. It also doesn't help that the film's director came out and said that certain sections of the CGI were supposed to look bad. Like, he had an excuse for all the CGI looking bad in the film. The Uncanny Valley wax figure cameos, the microwave baby scenes, the visually awful final battle. Like, was the entire film supposed to look absolutely terrible? Apparently it was, if you ask the director. Now look, I know there will be inevitable comments saying, just turn your brain off and enjoy it. But why do we have to keep turning our brain off for big budget action nowadays? Don't get me wrong, big dumb action has its place. I really enjoyed Extraction 2 just recently. But it seems to be the go-to excuse when a film just isn't as good as it was trying to be. Like, why are we continuously trying to defend films that just are bad? Nothing is gained over yes-manning films that aren't up to par. What kind of message does that send to studios? The fact that just turn your brain off is the go-to excuse for so many people defending movies like this is indicative of modern pop culture and how people are just becoming okay with movies being shit. Not to mention those movies exploiting you as a viewer with nostalgia bait, with nothing behind it. Like, again, the multiverse idea can be more than just nostalgia bait. Like, did you watch Everything Everywhere All at Once? I didn't have to turn off my brain to enjoy that. I shouldn't have to for The Flash either. But the difference here is, this film was made by someone who wanted to tell a good story with this concept. This film was made by a big budget studio obsessed with content over story. So, The Flash essentially is just a metaphor for the entire DCEU. It's beyond help. It's time to move on to the next phase. We still have Aquaman 2. I can't see that faring any better, to be honest. Even though Aquaman reached $1 billion like 5 years ago, that's just not in the cards anymore with the DCEU on its way out the door. The fact that this film is more than likely the last time we'll see Ben Affleck as Batman or Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman is kind of sad. To go out with such a whimper with cheap cameos that in reality just had no real bearing on the story. I don't think many people are going to exactly mourn the loss of Ezra Miller's Flash though. Now, I know I complained earlier about the tonal whiplash that the George Clooney cameo brought on with the somber end the film originally went for, But I do find it funny that Ezra Miller's Flash is kind of stuck in a post-Batman and Robin universe, which is kind of like a middle finger to this version of the character. Just the idea that Ezra Miller's Flash is stuck in a universe where you have Arnold Schwarzenegger's ice puns and bat nipples. That's the best takeaway from this movie. I don't care. And I also just love that they went with the idea of 2 Barry Allens in this film, because what's better than 1 Ezra Miller? 2 of them. Now, I will say before I bring this one to a close and, stop with the jokes, Supergirl actually showed a lot of potential here, and it was nice seeing a strong female character in a modern blockbuster that was actually really likable. This was the exception to the Hollywood problem that I mentioned at the start of the video. This part with Supergirl, it actually passed with flying colors. Supergirl was badass, and I do want to see more of her. She was a bright light in an extremely messy film that kind of is just a fittingly poor send-off for many of these characters. So, although The Flash has moments where it can get emotionally punchy with its story, it ultimately falls flat in a complete mess of nostalgia bait, awful CGI, comedy that falls flat, and newcomers and old faces that don't get the time they deserve. Although it has its moments where it looks like it's going to break free of the shackles of its faults, it ultimately is a film that perfectly encapsulates pretty much everything wrong with Hollywood today from a creative standpoint.